The slasher movie is cinema's most misunderstood genre. It is not about death, it is about fear. Specifically, the fear of the ordinary made lethal. The babysitter's phone call, the summer camp, the neighborhood street on Halloween night. The killer is always recognizable. The setting is always familiar. That is entirely the point. Hi, this is Movie Blanket Club. Today we are counting down the top 20 best slasher movies of all time. From the films that invented the rules to the ones that broke them, and the handful of masterpieces that existed long before anyone had a name for what they were. Some of these will make you angry. Good. 20. Sleepaway Camp, 1983. Robert Hiltzich's low-budget summer camp slasher is here for one reason, and that reason is the final shot, one of the most genuinely disturbing images in the history of the genre, delivered at the end of a film that has given you no preparation for it whatsoever. Angela, a shy and traumatized camper, played by Felissa Rose, arrives at Camp Arawak with her cousin Ricky, and a series of increasingly lethal accidents begin to occur around her. The film is not a well-made film in the conventional sense. The performances are uneven, the pacing is loose, and several scenes feel like outtakes from a more competent production. None of this matters. Sleepaway Camp earns its place on this list because it understood, in 1983, with almost no money and no studio support, that the slasher film's greatest potential was not the kill sequence, but the reveal. The final scene of this film, in which the camera holds on Angela's face for what feels like a very long time, has been described by people who saw it in theaters as producing a silence that did not recover into noise for several seconds. That is what cinema can do. Sleepaway Camp did it once, and it has never been forgotten. 19. Happy Death Day, 2017. Christopher Landon's film takes the Groundhog Day premise, a person trapped reliving the same day, and applies it to the slasher, and the resulting film is considerably smarter about both genres than its marketing suggested. Jessica Roth plays Tree, a college student who is murdered on her birthday and wakes up to repeat the same day until she can identify her killer. What the film understands, and what its spiritual predecessor did not, is that the loop structure fundamentally changes the horror. The killer cannot be avoided because the day always resets, which means the film can kill its protagonist repeatedly, in different ways, and use that repetition to build character rather than simply pile up bodies. Roth's performance carries the film. She is required to move from vapid to self-aware to genuinely brave across iterations, and she manages all three states with a precision the film's budget does not suggest. Happy Death Day is not a reinvention of the slasher. It is a very efficient deployment of a good formal idea in service of a genre that benefits from the injection. The sequel is also worthwhile. 18. You're Next, 2011. Adam Wingard's home invasion slasher is the most subversive film in the bottom half of this list. A movie that sets up the conventions of the genre with care and then inverts them in a way that requires the audience to reorient entirely midway through. A family reunion at a remote house is interrupted by a team of masked killers with crossbows, and the film initially proceeds as expected. Then, Sharni Vinson's character, the girlfriend of one of the sons, begins to respond to the situation in a way that no slasher victim in the genre's history has responded, and the film becomes something different without abandoning the pleasure of what it was. Your Next understands that the slasher's greatest formal limitation is the passivity of the victim, the convention that the protagonist must be pursued, must be terrified, must survive through luck or love rather than competence. Wingard removes this convention and watches what happens to the genre when it goes. What happens is considerably more interesting than another film that keeps it. 17. Maniac, 1980. William Lustig's film is the most genuinely uncomfortable entry on this list. A slasher constructed entirely from the killer's point of view, without the generic relief of a protagonist to root for or a final girl to survive. Joe Spinell plays Frank Zito, a scalp-collecting murderer moving through New York City, and his performance is so completely committed to the character's psychology. The self-loathing, the dissociation, the mother fixation that drives every act of violence, that the film becomes less a horror film than a case study with a soundtrack. Tom Savini's effects work, including a shotgun head explosion that remains one of the most viscerally effective practical effects sequences ever filmed, gives the kills a physical reality that the genre rarely achieved at this budget level. Maniac is not a film to recommend without qualification. It is exploitative, deliberately ugly, and designed to make you feel implicated in what you are watching. But it is also, and this distinction matters, a film made by people who understood exactly what they were doing and did it with complete intentionality. Spinell co-wrote it. He believed in it. The result is something that the genre has never fully processed. 16. Child's Play, 1988. Tom Holland's film gave the slasher genre its most formally absurd premise. A serial killer transfers his soul into a good guy doll and continues murdering from inside a toy. And the film's greatest achievement is treating that premise with complete seriousness, while simultaneously understanding that the seriousness itself is the source of the comedy. Brad Dourif's voice work as Chucky is the performance that makes the film work. He plays the character as genuinely malevolent, genuinely frustrated by his situation, and genuinely terrifying in the moments when the doll drops the act entirely. The film wisely focuses on Catherine Hicks as the mother who cannot get anyone to believe her, and on Alex Vincent as the child who knows the truth and cannot communicate it to adults who are not listening. Child's Play arrived at the peak of the moral panic about violent toys and violent media, and its central image, a beloved children's product that murders, was perfectly calibrated to exploit anxieties that the culture had not yet named. Chucky has appeared in 6 sequels, a television series, and a remake. None of them have quite recaptured what the first film understood about why the premise was frightening. 15. Candyman, 1992. Bernard Rose's adaptation of Clive Barker's short story is the most thematically substantial film in the lower half of this list. A slasher that uses its killer not as a figure of pure menace, but as the embodied consequence of a specific racial and historical violence. Tony Todd plays Candyman, the ghost of a murdered black artist whose name, spoken 5 times in a mirror, summons him. Virginia Madsen plays a graduate student researching urban legends in Chicago's Cabrini Green housing project, who discovers that the legend is real and that her investigation has consequences she did not anticipate. Rose's film is interested in what myths do to communities, and specifically in how myths about violence function in spaces where the state has abdicated responsibility for safety. The Cabrini Green sequences were filmed on location. The residents were paid to allow it, and the resulting film has an authenticity of environment that most horror films of the period could not have manufactured. Todd's performance is extraordinary, seductive, mournful, and genuinely threatening. Candyman is a film about who gets to be a legend and what the legend costs. 14. The Burning, 1981. Tony Malam's film is the most underrated entry on this list, a slasher produced at the peak of the Friday the 13th cycle. That is, in several respects, more technically accomplished than the film it was capitalizing on. Cropsey, the caretaker of a summer camp who is horribly disfigured by a prank gone wrong and returns years later with head shears, is a villain with a coherent motivation and a distinctive weapon. And Tom Savini's effects work. He chose this film over Friday the 13th. Part 2, specifically for the creative latitude it offered, is among the finest practical gore work in genre history. The raft sequence, in which Cropsey dispatches a group of campers with rapid, unsparing efficiency, is the most purely effective set piece in any summer camp slasher not named Halloween. The Burning has never quite achieved the canonical status of its competitors, partly because its distribution was limited, and partly because the genre's cultural memory coalesced around franchises rather than individual films. It deserves better than its reputation suggests. If you have only seen the films everyone has seen, this is the next one. 13. Dressed to Kill, 1980. Brian De Palma's film is the most formally elegant slasher ever made, a film constructed from split screens, slow-motion sequences, and Hitchcock references so dense and so precisely deployed that the film functions simultaneously as homage and as an original work of considerable craft. Angie Dickinson plays a sexually frustrated housewife who is murdered in an elevator after an encounter with a stranger she met at a museum, and the investigation of her killing pulls in her son and a call girl who witnessed the murder. De Palma shoots violence with a lushness that was deliberately provocative in 1980 and remains deliberately provocative now. The film understands that its own aestheticization of brutality is part of its argument. Dress to Kill was protested on release by feminist groups who objected to its treatment of female victimhood, and the objections are not without merit. The film is in conversation with those objections rather than indifferent to them. Pino Donaggio's score is one of the finest in the genre. Michael Caine plays the psychiatrist, and his casting, against type, for reasons the film's resolution makes clear, is the most interesting structural decision De Palma makes. 12. X, 2022. Ty West's film is the most cinematically literate entry on this list. A slasher set in rural Texas in 1979, filmed in New Zealand to look exactly like the Texas of that era, in which a pornographic film crew arrives at a farm to shoot a movie and encounters something considerably worse than bad reviews. West has spent his career studying the formal properties of genre films, the specific pacing, the visual grammar, the relationship between atmosphere and violence, and X deploys that knowledge with a precision that most horror filmmakers achieve only accidentally. The film is also, under its genre mechanics, a film about bodies and age and desire, and what happens when the old encounter the young in a context that makes their exclusion from pleasure explicit. Pearl, the elderly farmer's wife played by Mia Goth in a dual performance of considerable range, is the film's most complicated creation, a woman whose desire has curdled into something lethal over decades of suppression. West made the prequel Pearl simultaneously, on the same location, with the same cast. Both films are on streaming platforms. Watch them in chronological order. Then watch X again. It is a different film the second time. 11. Black Christmas, 1974. Bob Clark's Canadian film predates Halloween by 4 years and established virtually every formal convention that Halloween would perfect. The first-person camera, the obscene phone calls, the holiday setting, the sorority house, the killer whose identity is never revealed. Clark has never received the credit he deserves for this, partly because Halloween arrived with a score, a director of genius, and a studio willing to market it, and partly because the conventions Black Christmas established only became legible as conventions after Halloween made them famous. The film is also quietly a better film than its reputation suggests. The performances are strong, the phone call sequences are genuinely disturbing, and the decision not to reveal the killer's identity or motivation, resisted by the studio, maintained by Clark, is more sophisticated than anything the genre was doing in 1980. Black Christmas ends without resolution, without catharsis, and without the reassurance that the threat has been neutralized. It ends the way the genre is too frightened to end. If John Carpenter had not made Halloween, Bob Clark would be the name everyone knows. 10. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. Wes Craven's second film is the most primal entry on this list, a survival horror slasher, stripped of almost everything the genre would later add, leaving only a family stranded in the desert and the family that hunts them. The Carters, a middle-class nuclear family on a road trip to California, break down in the Nevada desert near a nuclear testing site and are set upon by a clan of feral, cannibalistic survivors who have lived in the hills for generations. Craven is working with almost no money and making a film that is explicitly about the collision of two American archetypes, the civilized suburban family and the savage rural other, and what happens when the assumptions each makes about the other are stripped away by necessity. The film is not elegant. It is deliberately rough, shot with the urgency of people who could not afford a second take, and the rawness serves the material in the same way that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's rawness serves its material. The final act, in which the Carters stop fleeing and start fighting, inverts the survivalist premise with a clarity that Craven renders as disturbing rather than triumphant. Alexandra Aja's 2006 remake is exceptionally effective and worth watching. The original is more honest about what the story is actually saying. 9. Deep Red, 1975. Dario Argento's giallo masterpiece is the most visually inventive film on this list. A murder mystery slasher, in which a jazz musician witnesses the killing of a psychic and becomes obsessed with identifying the killer, and in which every frame is composed with the confidence of a director who understands that style is not decoration, but meaning. David Hemmings plays the protagonist, and his investigation leads him through a series of kills that Argento stages with a combination of extreme violence and extreme beauty that defines the giallo aesthetic. The camera does not look away, and the camera does not pretend that what it is showing is neutral. The Goblin score, as one of the finest in horror, driving and relentless, becomes a character in itself, arriving on the soundtrack to cue dread before the image has justified it. Deep Red contains the answer to its mystery in a shot that appears early in the film and that most viewers do not consciously register until the reveal makes them understand what they saw. This is not a trick. It is a formal argument about perception and attention that the slasher genre never made again with the same precision. 8. Peeping Tom, 1960. Michael Powell's film destroyed his career, ended his collaboration with Emmerich Pressburger, and was dismissed on release as the most morally depraved film in British cinema history. It is also the most formally sophisticated film on this list, and its influence on everything that followed, from Psycho, which appeared in the same year and is often credited with the same insights, is incalculable and under-acknowledged. Carl Bohm plays Mark Lewis, a focus puller at a film studio who murders women with a sharpened tripod leg while filming their deaths on a camera that contains a mirror, so that his victims can see themselves dying. Powell, who appears in the film as Mark's abusive father in home movie footage, constructs an argument about cinema's relationship to voyeurism, about what it means to watch, and what watching costs both the viewer and the viewed, that the medium has been processing ever since. Peeping Tom was not rehabilitated until Martin Scorsese championed it in the 1970s. It is now recognized as one of the greatest British films ever made. The critics who destroyed Powell for making it were wrong about the film, and right about how uncomfortable it was making them feel. And the distinction between those two things is what makes it essential. 7. Friday the 13th, 1980. Sean S. Cunningham's film does not rank this high, because it is the most accomplished film on this list. It is not. It ranks this high because it is the most influential film on this list outside of the top 3, and because influence in genre cinema is not separable from quality in the way that criticism sometimes pretends. Friday the 13th codified the summer camp slasher, the isolated location, the counselors who die in order of their moral transgressions as the genre's audience came to read it, the killer revealed only at the film's conclusion. Tom Savini's effects work, creating the template for what a slasher kill sequence should look like. Kevin Bacon appears in an early role. The score, by Harry Manfredini, created the ki-ki-ki ma-ma-ma sound that became the genre's most recognizable sonic signature. And the ending, the final girl in a canoe, the lake at dawn, and what rises from it, is a pure, crystalline piece of horror filmmaking that the film has not quite earned through anything that preceded it, and that works completely regardless. Friday the 13th made the slasher franchise possible. It is not the best film that possibility produced. It is the reason the possibility existed. 6. My Bloody Valentine, 1981. George Mihalka's Canadian slasher is the most atmospherically distinctive entry on this list. A film that earns its place not through formal sophistication, but through the complete commitment with which it builds and sustains a sense of place. The setting is Valentine Bluffs, a mining town in Nova Scotia where, 20 years earlier, a mining accident on Valentine's Day left one survivor who, upon rescue, had gone mad and murdered the two supervisors who abandoned their posts to attend a party. The killer, Harry Warden, a miner in full gear with a gas mask and a pickaxe, is the genre's most visually coherent creation outside of Michael Myers, a figure so completely of his environment that he reads as an extension of the mine itself, rather than a person moving through it. The underground sequences, filmed in an actual working mine in Sydney, Nova Scotia, generate a specific and irreplaceable claustrophobia that no studio set could have manufactured. The American theatrical cut removed 9 minutes of gore at the MPAA's insistence, restoring the footage for the 2009 unrated release that is the correct version to watch. My Bloody Valentine understands that the slasher's most effective resource is not the kill, but the location, the place that feels wrong before anyone dies in it. 5. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Tobe Hooper's film is the most viscerally effective horror film ever made, a work that operates at a pitch of sustained intensity that no subsequent film in the genre has fully matched, and that achieves this entirely through implication, editing, and sound. Contrary to its reputation, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre contains very little actual gore. What it contains is the sound of violence, the chainsaw, the screaming, the impact, cut against images that refuse to show exactly what the sound implies, and the resulting effect is more disturbing than any explicit image could have been. Hooper made this film for $300,000 in the Texas summer heat, with a cast and crew who were physically exhausted by the end of production and who have described the final dinner table sequence as genuinely traumatic to film. That exhaustion is visible in every frame. The film looks like something found rather than made. Leatherface, the mask-wearing killer modeled loosely on Ed Gein, is the genre's most purely physical villain. He does not speak, does not reason, and does not stop. And the film's final image of him, spinning with his chainsaw in the sunset light, is one of the most indelible final shots in American cinema. 4. Scream, 1996. Wes Craven's film is the most intelligent entry on this list, and the one most often underestimated by people who encounter it for the first time. A slasher that deconstructs the genre's conventions while simultaneously deploying them, that makes its characters aware of the rules of slasher films while subjecting them to those rules, and that works as genuine horror, despite and because of its own self-awareness. Kevin Williamson's screenplay is the finest in the genre's history, structurally precise, character-specific, and capable of the tonal range required to be funny about horror and frightening about comedy at the same time. The opening sequence, in which Drew Barrymore is killed before the opening credits, in a subversion of casting expectations so complete it recalibrated what audiences were willing to assume, remains the single best opening scene in any slasher film. Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott is the genre's most completely realized protagonist, a person with a history, with specific vulnerabilities, and with the capability to choose rather than simply react. Craven had spent 25 years making the genre, had watched it calcify into self-parody, and made a film that acknowledged the calcification and transcended it. That is a very difficult thing to do. Scream did it without visible effort. 3. A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. Wes Craven's film is the most formally inventive entry in the top half of this list. A slasher that removes the safety of consciousness by making the kill space coextensive with sleep itself, so that the survival strategy available to every previous slasher protagonist, stay awake, stay together, stay in the light, becomes not just insufficient, but actively dangerous. Freddy Krueger, played by Robert Englund, in a performance that balances genuine menace and sardonic black comedy with a precision no sequel ever quite replicated, is the genre's most imaginative creation. A killer who operates in the dream logic of the victim's own subconscious, limited only by the imagination of the person he is hunting. The original film uses very little money to create images of startling originality: the glove emerging from the bathtub, the ceiling sequence, the body bag dragged through the school corridor. Johnny Depp appears in his screen debut and his death sequence is the film's most purely spectacular moment. Craven conceived Nightmare as a response to news reports of young Southeast Asian men dying in their sleep for no identifiable cause. He took the real horror, the thing that kills you where you cannot defend yourself, and built around it a film that the genre had never seen before. 2. Psycho, 1960. Alfred Hitchcock's film invented the modern horror film. Before Psycho, cinema had understood horror as something that arrived from outside. The monster, the creature, the supernatural intrusion. Hitchcock placed it in the room next to yours. Norman Bates is not a creature. He is a man who runs a motel on a highway that used to be busy, and Janet Leigh is not a protagonist in a horror film. She is a woman who stole money and made a wrong turn, and she is killed in the shower at the end of the first act before the film has given any indication that this is the kind of film she is in. The shower sequence, assembled from 78 camera setups in 7 days, does not show a knife entering a body. It shows a woman who is alive and then is not, cut against the sound of what happened, and it remains the most formally accomplished sequence of violence in the genre's history. Anthony Perkins plays Norman Bates with a gentleness that makes every subsequent moment more disturbing. You want to reassure him, which is exactly the position Hitchcock needs you to occupy. Bernard Herrmann's score, strings-only stabs are the sound of the genre itself. Every slasher film made after 1960 is, in some essential way, a response to Psycho. 1. Halloween, 1978. John Carpenter's film is the greatest slasher ever made, and the argument for placing it above Psycho is this. Psycho invented the genre, but Halloween perfected it. Every formal element of the modern slasher, the masked killer, the suburban setting, the October atmosphere, the final girl, the score as a character in itself, was assembled here with a completeness and a precision that the genre has spent 45 years trying to replicate. Carpenter made Halloween for $300,000, shot it in 21 days in the spring in California, standing in for Illinois in autumn, and created a film that feels colder than the season it depicts. The score, 5 notes in 5/4 time, which Carpenter composed himself at the producer's suggestion because they could not afford to license anything, is the most recognizable horror score ever written. Michael Myers, glimpsed rather than seen, still rather than moving, present in backgrounds rather than foregrounds, is not a man in a mask. He is the shape of something that has no human explanation and requires none. Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode is cinema's defining final girl, competent, frightened, and capable of a resilience that the film earns rather than simply asserts. The last shot, Loomis looking at the lawn where Michael fell, finding nothing, tells you that the film you have been watching is not about one Halloween. It is about all of them. And there you have it, the top 20 best slasher movies of all time. From Sleepaway Camp's infamous final frame to Michael Myers standing in the dark at the end of a suburban street. What the best films in this genre understand is that the killer is never the most frightening thing in them. The most frightening thing is the world that made him possible, and the fact that you recognize it. This is Movie Blanket Club. Tell us in the comments, is Halloween or Psycho the greatest slasher film ever made? We want the argument.